Somaliland is one of the strangest realities on Earth because it functions like a country, but the world mostly refuses to call it one. There are government offices, police checkpoints, schools, courts, elections, money that people spend every day. Life here moves with routine and rules, just like anywhere else. And yet, on most official maps and in most diplomatic documents, Somaliland is barely a footnote. So today we're not treating it like a headline. We're looking at it as lived reality, quiet pride, hard-earned calm, and one big question that sits underneath everything. What actually makes a country a country? A nation without a name on the map. Unrecognized sounds like a technical word, something for diplomats and paperwork. But on the ground, it's not abstract at all. It shows up in the most practical parts of life. Somaliland has many of the things you'd expect a country to have: institutions, public services, security, a political system, and a sense of national identity. People here don't wake up thinking they live in a gray zone. They wake up, they work, they build, they plan. But without recognition that everyday reality doesn't travel well. A passport becomes more than a document. It becomes a question mark. Banking, trade, formal agreements, international opportunities, everything gets a little harder, a little slower, a little more uncertain. Not because life here isn't real, but because the outside world often treats it like it isn't. And that's the strange part. Somaliland isn't waiting to exist. It already exists, in daily routines, in institutions, in the way people carry themselves. It's real life, living under an asterisk. And what's most surprising is this: even in that condition, life here still looks normal. Hargeisa, ordinary life, quiet pride. Hargeisa doesn't try to impress you. It doesn't have to. The city's power is in how ordinary it feels, because that ordinary is not guaranteed. In the morning, markets come alive. You see piles of produce, fabric, tools, things that tell you people are working with their hands in building a life that's practical, not performative. You hear bargaining, quick jokes, greetings that feel familiar, even if you've never been here before. And then there's tea, not as a tourist image, but as a daily habit. Small shops, plastic chairs, shade against a wall. Conversations slow down. People talk, listen, check in. In places where the world's recognition is missing, community becomes a kind of stability you can actually touch. You also notice order, quiet, informal, but present. Checkpoints, a sense that rules matter because people need them to. The city runs on a kind of shared agreement. We keep things calm. We keep things moving. Hargeisa is Somaliland's most convincing argument, and it doesn't even try to be one. It's simply a city living its life. And that's the point. This normal life doesn't happen by accident. It's something people here protect every single day. Stability has a price. When a place feels calm, it's tempting to assume it's always been that way. In Somaliland, calm is something that was built carefully, and it's something that can't be taken for granted. People here carry memories they don't always speak out loud, not because they're hidden, but because they're heavy. You sense it in the way disagreements are handled quickly, in the way elders listen before they speak, in the way community pressure can stop problems from becoming something bigger. There's a kind of discipline in that, not military discipline, social discipline. The understanding that instability is expensive. It costs livelihoods. It costs trust. It costs the future. So the calm you feel in Somaliland isn't passive, it's active. It's maintained. But stability has a price too, because once you've protected peace, you want more than peace. You want opportunity, jobs, investment, a future that doesn't require constantly proving you can survive. And that brings Somaliland back to its central contradiction. You can build order internally, but you can't force the outside world to open the door. And if Somaliland wants a bigger future, it needs connection. Not just trade, not just conversation, real access to the world. Berbera, the port that wants a future. Berbera is where Somaliland looks outward. A port is never just a port. It's a message. We are connected. We belong in the flow of the world. You see it in containers, cranes, trucks, schedules. It's the global language of logistics. Simple, unforgiving, practical. Goods move. Deals get done. Routes matter more than headlines. And that's where the irony hits. A container doesn't need recognition. A shipment doesn't need a passport. Ijada can move, even when status can't. So Berbera becomes this symbol of Somaliland's situation. The world can do business around you, but still hesitate to officially acknowledge you. For Somaliland, a port isn't only about money. It's about possibility, about being seen, being reachable, being part of something bigger than survival. But right behind the modern machinery and salt air, another Somaliland begins. Older, quieter, and deeper. Because just inland, the story stops being about contracts and shipping lanes and becomes about time itself. Laas Geel, the cave that kept its colors. You leave the city and the landscape starts to feel empty in a way that forces your attention. Rock, dust, heat, long distances, few distractions, and then you reach Laas Geel. There's no grand entrance, no big museum building, just stone, and a quiet opening that leads into something that feels almost impossible. Color preserved across thousands of years. Inside, the cave paintings don't feel like art the way we usually mean it. They feel like communication, like a record, a library before writing. Animals, human figures, ritual scenes, patterns that still hold their shape, like the past decided not to disappear. Standing there, you realize something. Modern labels like recognized and unrecognized are very new. But this place, this memory, belongs to a timeline that doesn't care about modern paperwork. And that's what makes it so striking. A land the world often overlooks is holding on to a heritage that's bigger than politics. But Laas Geel also points to the most basic truth of life here. Everything depends on balance, on climate, on scarcity, on what the land gives and what it withholds. Because when the ground is dry, the most valuable thing is not history, it's water. And the next part of Somaliland's story is about that, and about what it reveals when people have to share what's scarce. Scarcity, water, distance, patience. In Somaliland, the landscape teaches you the same lesson over and over. Distance is real, and resources are not guaranteed. Roads stretch out into open land. Towns can feel far apart. And when the heat sits on everything, time starts to move differently. Water shapes the rhythm of life here more than any calendar does. It decides where people settle, how herds move, what a market can sell, and how much a family can plan ahead. You don't have to dramatize it to feel it. You see it in small details. The way containers are used, the way people think in terms of enough, the way every trip has a purpose. And scarcity does something else too. It changes the social rules. When something is limited, you can't treat community as optional. You depend on neighbors, on relatives, on local networks, because the environment doesn't give you a lot of room for mistakes. That's where patience becomes a survival skill. Not the romantic kind, just the practical kind. You wait, you adapt, you take what the land allows. You build routines that can survive uncertainty. And once you understand that, Somaliland's calm makes even more sense. When life is already demanding, instability isn't just political, it's personal. So people protect what they can control: daily order, mutual respect, and the ability to keep moving forward, even slowly. But the next question is this: how does an economy grow under those conditions? The answer often starts in one place, where people meet, trade, and trust each other. Markets and trust, the real currency. Markets in Somaliland aren't just places to buy things. They're where society shows how it actually works. You see money changing hands, yes, but you also see something less visible: trust. People know each other. They remember faces. They keep track of reputation. Deals don't survive here just because they're written down. They survive because relationships hold them up. This is where ordinary life becomes a kind of system. Someone sells tea and snacks. Someone repairs phones. Someone moves goods between towns. Someone brings produce in from the edges of the city. The economy isn't flashy, but it's real, and it's constant. And often the strongest engine in that daily life is quiet and routine. Families, small businesses, women running stalls, people managing the logistics of survival without calling it entrepreneurship. It's not a headline, it's a structure. In places that are politically invisible, that structure matters even more. Because when external support is limited, internal reliability becomes everything. You can't build a future on slogans. You build it on people showing up, day after day, keeping things functioning. But that leads to the pressure point Somaliland can't escape: the younger generation. Because trust and routine can hold the present together, but the future depends on whether young people believe staying is worth it. Youth. Staying, leaving, belonging. For young people in Somaliland, the biggest question isn't only about identity, it's about options. They grow up with a strong sense of, we are Somaliland. But they also grow up knowing that the outside world often doesn't treat that identity the same way. Recognition, or the lack of it, can shape everything from travel to work opportunities to how easily they can connect with the wider world. So you hear the same tension that exists in many places, only sharper. Do you stay and build even if progress is slower? Or do you leave to find opportunity elsewhere, even if it means carrying your home as something you can't fully explain on a form? And that's where Somaliland's story becomes deeply human. Because this isn't just politics, it's families. It's parents hoping their kids will have a future that's bigger than survival. It's young people trying to balance pride with practicality. Some will stay because they believe in building something that's theirs. Some will leave because they can't afford to wait. Most live somewhere in between, loving a place and still feeling the limits of it. And when you step back, you realize Somaliland isn't only asking the world for a label, it's asking for access, for the ability to turn stability into opportunity. Which brings us back to the simplest question: what actually makes a country real? What makes a country real? If you only define a country by recognition, Somaliland becomes a technical problem, a debate, a line on a map. But if you define a country by lived reality, by institutions, community, shared identity, daily responsibility, then Somaliland looks very real. People here aren't performing statehood, they're living it. They vote, they pay, they work, they follow rules, they argue, they build. They carry a collective memory. They maintain a kind of order that many recognized places struggle to protect. And that's the uncomfortable part of this story. Somaliland challenges the idea that legitimacy only comes from outside approval. At the same time, recognition still matters, because it opens doors. It affects passports, trade, investment, education, international partnerships. In modern life, being real isn't just about existing, it's about being allowed to participate. So Somaliland sits in that in-between space, strong enough to function, limited enough to feel the ceiling. And maybe that's why it stays with you, because it forces you to ask what's more powerful, paper or people, a signature or a society. Somaliland doesn't need permission to exist. It already exists in the routines of Hargeisa, in the salt air of Berbera, in the ancient colors of Laas Geel, and in the patience it takes to build stability in a hard landscape. But in the world we live in, recognition is more than symbolism. It's access, it's opportunity, it's the difference between surviving and truly progressing. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Somaliland is not a story about a missing country. It's a story about how real life can be, quietly, stubbornly real, even when the world refuses to fully see it. If you want more journeys into places the world overlooks, places that feel like footnotes until you look closer, subscribe and we'll keep going.